At exactly 2:47 a.m., the presidential convoy of Ibrahim Traoré moved silently through the sleeping streets of Ouagadougou. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, just the low growl of armored vehicles and the heavy breathing of soldiers, who knew that something historic was about to unfold. For weeks, whispers had reached Traoré's desk, whispers of money vanishing from the national treasury, of strange shipments leaving the finance ministry under the cover of night, of briefcases exchanged in parking lots. The people of Burkina Faso were starving, struggling to afford bread and rice, and yet someone in his government seemed to be living like a king. That someone was Robert Kafando, the finance minister. On the surface, Kafando was respected, a polished man in his early 50s, with a wide smile and a carefully ironed suit that gave him the air of a professional technocrat. But beneath the smiles, his empire was rotting. Unexplained luxury cars, a newly built mansion on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, and rumors of offshore accounts in Switzerland. It all pointed in one direction: theft, on a scale never seen before in the nation's history. Traoré had sworn to the people that corruption would not be tolerated. Yet here it was, sitting inside his own government like a snake. The final confirmation had come from an unlikely source, Kafando's own wife. For 3 months, she had worn a wire under her clothing, recording secret meetings, hushed conversations, and late-night phone calls. The recordings revealed everything: the bribes from foreign companies, the laundering of state funds, and the hidden cash stashed in their home. She had done it quietly, risking her life, and delivered the evidence straight to Traoré. That was why the president was now awake at this unholy hour, dressed in military fatigues, his boots heavy on the polished floors of the finance minister's luxurious mansion. He had chosen not to delegate this task. He would see it with his own eyes. The soldiers surrounding him were tense but disciplined. Their weapons gleamed under the dim light as they moved through the hallways. Every creak of the wooden stairs seemed louder in the silence of the night. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then went quiet. At the end of the hall, Traoré stopped. Before him stood a massive door of polished mahogany, the bedroom of the finance minister. Behind it, he knew, lay the man who had betrayed his country. The air was heavy, charged with the weight of history. Traoré clenched his fist, his jaw tight. He thought of the children in the villages, their stomachs empty. He thought of the farmers who worked under the sun, and yet could not afford a proper meal. He thought of every speech he had given about justice, sovereignty, and sacrifice. And then, with a roar, he kicked the door open. The wood splintered under the force, swinging wide and crashing against the wall. Soldiers stormed inside, flashlights slicing through the darkness. And there, illuminated in the sudden glare, was a scene so shocking that even Traoré, hardened by years of war and betrayal, felt his breath catch. Bundles of cash, not just a few notes, not just a few stacks, but millions, were scattered across the floor, piled on the bed, stuffed into open suitcases. The bills gleamed in the light, a mountain of stolen wealth resting beside the sleeping body of Robert Kafando. The minister jolted awake, his eyes wide in terror. His wife sat beside him, pale and trembling, though she alone knew that this moment had been coming for months. Traoré took a step forward, his boots crunching on the crisp paper of fallen banknotes. $15 million, he said coldly, his voice echoing in the silence of the room. While our people starve. The soldiers closed in. The finance minister's empire had just collapsed, and the entire nation was about to see the truth with their own eyes. Robert Kafando's face had turned ghostly pale. The gleam of the flashlights reflected off his sweat-drenched forehead as he sat upright in the bed, his eyes darting between the soldiers, the president, and the mountain of cash that betrayed him. "This is not what it looks like," he stammered, his voice breaking under the weight of panic. His trembling hands clutched at the bedsheet as though the thin fabric could shield him from the truth. Spilling across the floor, Traoré did not move at first. He stood at the edge of the bed, his silhouette towering in the dim light, boots still pressed against the scattered banknotes. His eyes were steel, fixed on the man who had sworn an oath to serve the nation, yet had fed off its lifeblood. Not what it looks like. Traoré's voice was sharp, rising like a whip. He pointed at the overflowing suitcases. the bundles of cash spilling from desk drawers, even from the hollowed back of a wardrobe now swinging open. $15 million in a minister's bedroom. Do you think the people will believe your excuses? Do you think I will? Kafando's lips quivered. It was for safekeeping. The ministry funds, temporarily. Silence, Trower barked, his command echoing off the walls. The treasury has been drained, salaries unpaid, projects abandoned. And here lies the answer. While children starve, while farmers bleed, you sleep upon stolen money. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the ceiling fan turning slowly above. The soldiers tightened their grip on their rifles, their eyes locked on the disgraced minister. And then, from the corner of the bed, Kafando's wife lowered her gaze. Her hands trembled, but not with guilt, with relief. She had carried this burden for months, waiting for this very night. Trower noticed her stillness. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You knew. She hesitated, then nodded softly. For 3 months, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I could not watch any longer. The people suffer. My family suffers. He brought strangers into our home at night, businessmen from abroad. He took envelopes filled with dollars, promises of contracts, of land, of mines. I wore a wire, as you asked. I gave you everything. The minister's head snapped toward her, his eyes burning with betrayal. You betrayed me. His voice cracked with fury. She did not flinch. No, Robert. You betrayed us all. You betrayed this nation. The soldiers exchanged glances. Even the hardest among them felt the sting of her words. Trower exhaled slowly, the tension in the room wrapping tighter around everyone's chest. He recalled the hours he had spent listening to the recordings. She had risked her life to deliver. Hushed conversations with oil executives. Drunken boasts about foreign bribes. The sound of banknotes being counted late at night. It had been damning. But seeing the evidence now, with his own eyes, was something else entirely. He turned back to Kafando. Your wife showed more loyalty to this country in 3 months than you did in your entire career. You stand exposed before your people. No lies will save you now. Kafando tried to rise from the bed, but 2 soldiers pressed him back down. His voice grew shrill, desperate. You cannot humiliate me like this. I am the finance minister of Burkina Faso. No, Trower snapped. You are a thief, a parasite, and the nation will see you as such. He motioned to his men. Take him. The soldiers pulled Kafando from the bed, his protests echoing through the mansion's hallways. His bare feet scraped against the tile floor, the bedsheet falling from his hands as if stripping away the last of his dignity. The millions of dollars remained behind, silent witnesses to his downfall. Trower turned back to the wife. She sat in silence, her eyes wet but resolute. He gave her a small nod, a gesture of respect. Few had ever shown such courage. The president's voice was calm now, steady. At dawn, the people will know. They will see with their own eyes the betrayal that has been uncovered. The age of impunity ends tonight. Outside, the horizon was just beginning to pale with the first hint of morning. A new day was coming, not just for Ibrahim Traore, not just for his government, but for the entire nation of Burkina Faso. By the time the sun crept over the rooftops of Ouagadougou, the city was no longer asleep. Word had already spread like wildfire. The finance minister had been caught red-handed, and the president himself had led the raid. At dawn, a convoy of military trucks rumbled down the streets, carrying crates filled with the very money discovered inside. Robert Kafando's home. The soldiers were solemn, their movements precise, as if carrying not just currency but the soul of the nation itself. In the central square, cameras were already set up. Journalists from across Africa, and even foreign correspondents, had gathered after whispers of the scandal leaked into the night. By morning, the truth could no longer be contained. When the first crate was opened, a gasp rippled through the crowd. Stacks of crisp US dollars gleamed under the sunlight, neatly bundled yet obscene in their sheer volume. A second crate was lifted, then a third. Soon the entire platform was covered in piles of cash, $15 million, once hidden in the shadows of betrayal, now laid bare for all to see. Mothers with babies on their backs stood frozen in disbelief. Farmers who had walked miles to sell their produce at the market clenched their fists. Students, still in their uniforms, raised their phones to record history. An old man in the crowd shook his head slowly, whispering, "All this, while we starved." And then the anger erupted. Justice. One voice shouted. Another echoed, "Down with thieves." Soon the square thundered with chants, a chorus of fury that rolled across the city. Adelet. Justice. Adelet. From the balcony overlooking the square, Traoré appeared in his military uniform, his posture unyielding. The chants grew louder at the sight of him. Some people raising their fists, others simply weeping at the raw emotion of the moment. He lifted his hand for silence. Slowly, the voices fell quiet, leaving only the faint hum of the wind and the clicking of cameras. "My people," Traoré began, his voice carrying through the microphones, strong yet heavy with the weight of betrayal. "Last night, I entered the home of the finance minister of this nation. What we found there is before your eyes. $15 million, stolen from you, stolen from your children, stolen from the future of Burkina Faso." A murmur of rage rippled through the crowd. He continued, "While you struggled to feed your families, while schools remained unfinished and hospitals lacked medicine, a man entrusted with your resources built his empire on your suffering. He betrayed his oath, he betrayed his people, and he betrayed his country." The cameras zoomed in on the mountain of money, the soldiers standing guard, the faces of the citizens. Already, international news agencies were broadcasting the images around the world. Headlines were forming in real time. Burkina Faso president exposes $15 million corruption scandal. Finance minister caught with suitcases of cash. Traoré declares war on corruption. Traoré's voice hardened. "Let it be known, this government will not tolerate parasites. No official, no minister, no man is above the people. Today we begin a new era. An era where betrayal will be punished and justice will be delivered." The square erupted again. Cheers, tears, chants of his name. But beneath the noise, something deeper was happening. For the first time in decades, the people felt that the system might finally be turning in their favor. In the villages, radios crackled with the news. In schools, teachers paused their lessons to let children listen. In cafes, conversations stopped as televisions replayed the footage of the crates being unloaded. Some wept openly. Others smiled with cautious hope. Even beyond Burkina Faso, the ripple spread. Neighboring countries watched closely. Governments in West Africa, long plagued by corruption, suddenly faced pressure from their own citizens demanding the same transparency. In Paris, in Washington, in Brussels, analysts scrambled to understand what Traoré's bold move would mean for foreign interests in the region. Meanwhile, in a dark cell beneath the presidential compound, Robert Kafando sat in silence, shackled to a chair. His eyes were red, his face unshaven, his once polished suit now wrinkled and stained. He could still hear the faint echoes of the crowd outside, their chants of justice, seeping through the walls like a haunting reminder of his downfall. And for the first time, the man who once controlled millions felt powerless. The cell was small, dimly lit by a single bulb that flickered now and then. Robert Kafando sat on a metal chair, his wrists bound, his eyes hollow from a night without sleep. The echo of chanting crowds outside reached him faintly. Justice. Adelet. A reminder that the world he once controlled had collapsed overnight. The door opened. Soldiers stepped aside as President Ibrahim Traoré entered, his boots heavy on the concrete floor. He did not bring a file, nor did he need notes. The truth was written all over the crates of money, the recordings from the hidden wire, and the eyes of a betrayed nation. For a long moment, Traoré stood in silence, simply watching Kafando. Then he spoke, his voice low but sharp. "Tell me, Robert, how many hospitals could $15 million have built? How many schools? How many bags of rice for the hungry?" Kafando swallowed, his throat dry. I never meant for it to go this far. This far. Traoré's voice thundered, echoing off the cold walls. You robbed an entire nation. You drained the blood of your people while they begged for crumbs. Kafando shook his head desperately. You don't understand. Mr. President, There were pressures, foreign companies, contracts, diplomats. They all wanted a peace. I only did what was necessary to keep them satisfied, to keep them from turning against us. Trower leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. So you betrayed your own people to please strangers? You sold our land, our minds, our future, for bribes. The minister broke. His voice cracked. Yes, he shouted. Yes, I took the money. They offered millions, French mining firms, American oil companies, even middlemen from Europe. They promised investments, aid, military support, but only if I gave them contracts. I kept some for myself. I thought I could control it. I thought no one would find out. The room fell silent. The confession hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Trower straightened, his voice calm again. Your greed was their weapon. You let them use you to bleed our country dry. And now, you will face the judgment not only of this nation but of history. Kafando slumped in his chair, his spirit broken. For the first time, tears welled in his eyes. What will become of me? Trower's face remained unreadable. You will stand trial, and the people will decide. Meanwhile, outside the walls of the prison, the scandal was igniting storms across the world. In Paris, government spokesmen scrambled to deny any knowledge of bribery. On television, commentators debated whether France's decades-long influence in West Africa was finally collapsing. One French newspaper headline read, Burkina Faso breaks chains of corruption. In Washington, State Department officials called for due process, but privately worried about losing access to Burkina Faso's resources. Across European capitals, executives of mining firms rushed to erase evidence of their secret dealings with Kafando. And in Africa itself, the effect was seismic. From Dakar to Nairobi, radio shows buzzed with callers praising Trower's courage. Social media platforms exploded with hashtags. Hashtag Justice for Burkina. Hashtag End Corruption. Hashtag Trower the People as President. University students in Ghana marched with banners that read, If Burkina Faso can, so can we. Activists in Nigeria demanded investigations into their own ministers. Even in distant South Africa, journalists asked whether a Burkina moment could spread across the continent. For decades, corruption had been spoken of only in whispers, an untouchable disease of African politics. But now, with images of $15 million laid bare in the public square, there was no more silence. Inside the presidential palace that evening, Trower met with his closest advisors. The air was heavy with urgency. Papers and reports scattered across the polished table. One general leaned forward. Mr. President, the people are with you. But this is bigger than Kafando. He was only one man. If foreign companies bought him, they may have bought others too. Trower nodded slowly. Exactly. This is not just about one minister. This is about a system, one that has chained our nation for decades. Tonight we cut off one head of the snake, but tomorrow we go after the rest. There was silence in the room. His advisors understood the gravity. Taking down a minister was bold. Taking down an entire network of corruption, politicians, businessmen, foreign powers, was revolutionary. Trower clenched his fist on the table. Let the world hear me. Burkina Faso will no longer be a playground for thieves. Every stolen coin will be uncovered. Every parasite will be exposed. And if they resist, let them resist. We will not bow. The world was watching, and Burkina Faso was no longer the same. The scandal did not end with Robert Kafando. In many ways, it had only just begun. Within 48 hours of the finance minister's arrest, President Ibrahim Traoré announced the creation of a national anti-corruption task force, composed of military officers, auditors, and trusted civilians. Its mandate was clear: comb through every ministry, every contract, every offshore account, and bring the truth into daylight. The city buzzed with nervous energy. Some officials whispered in fear, shredding documents late at night. Others tried to smuggle their families and fortunes across borders. Banks reported unusual activity, large withdrawals, sudden transfers to Europe and Dubai. But Traorés men were already watching. At the international airport, Customs officers intercepted a deputy minister's wife, carrying $2 million in gold bars, hidden inside her luggage. In Bobo Dioulasso, a regional governor was caught, attempting to flee with briefcases stuffed with CFA francs. Each arrest fueled the fire of public outrage and strengthened the people's trust in Traore's mission. The streets of Ouagadougou, filled with demonstrations unlike anything the nation had ever seen. But these were not protests of anger against the government. They were uprisings of support. University students marched with banners reading, "No more thieves in power." Farmers drove their carts into the capital, carrying sacks of grain as symbolic offerings for the nation's future. Mothers with children in their arms stood shoulder to shoulder, chanting the same word that now defined the national mood: Adalet. Justice. Adalet. Night after night, the city squares turned into assemblies. Citizens shared stories of their struggles, unpaid wages, empty hospitals, abandoned schools, and then swore to hold every official accountable. For the first time in decades, the people believed their voices mattered. The press played its part as well. Independent journalists, emboldened by the atmosphere, began publishing leaks from within the task force. One explosive article revealed that at least 7 other ministers had received bribes from foreign companies, funneling millions into secret accounts in Switzerland, Monaco, and the Cayman Islands. Names that had once commanded fear now appeared on front-page headlines, branded with words like traitor and thief. International networks picked up the story. Al Jazeera ran a special titled Burkina Faso's War on Corruption. The BBC called it a political earthquake in West Africa. CNN replayed the footage of Traoré standing beside crates of money, describing it as the most dramatic anti-corruption expose in Africa in decades. Inside villages, the ripple effect was extraordinary. Radios crackled with fiery debates. Market women pointed to the news and said, "See? The president fights for us." Children in schools repeated the word justice as if it were part of their lessons. Even elders, who had seen generations of broken promises, admitted that something felt different this time. In one remote province, a farmer named Moussa Diallo stood up at a community meeting and declared, "If our president can face thieves in his own government, then we too must face thieves in our villages. No more silence. No more fear." His words were echoed in towns across the country. Local committees sprang up to monitor budgets, question local officials, and demand receipts for every public project. It was as if the spirit of accountability had broken free from the capital and begun to spread like wildfire across the land. But with every victory came new enemies. Foreign companies that had once treated Burkina Faso as easy prey now found themselves exposed. Mining conglomerates in Canada and France saw their secret contracts cancelled. Oil brokers in Houston panicked as documents linking them to bribes surfaced in the media. Behind closed doors, diplomats warned Traoré that his crusade could isolate the nation from international aid. Some even hinted at sanctions. But the president was unmoved. "Let them threaten," he told his generals. "A nation that stands on justice cannot be isolated. If they close their doors, we will open our own. If they cut us off, we will grow stronger." Back in his prison cell, Robert Kafando listened to the news with despair. Each revelation of another corrupted official chipped away at his hope that he would not stand alone. He realized now that history would remember him not just as a thief, but as the man whose downfall had ignited a revolution. And outside his cell, the revolution was indeed growing. The morning after the arrest of Robert Kafando, the streets of Ouagadougou erupted into a sea of noise, color, and raw emotion. Crowds poured into Independence Square, waving flags, singing revolutionary songs, and chanting the name of President Ibrahim Traoré. It was as if the entire nation had been waiting for this moment, a public reckoning, a cleansing storm that would wash away decades of silent suffering. News outlets across Africa and beyond broadcast the dramatic footage. President Traoré himself, dressed in military fatigues, kicking down the finance minister's door at 2:47 a.m. The grainy recording of the raid spread like wildfire, every frame dissected and replayed. The images of Kafando's bedroom, littered with stacks of American dollars, shocked the world. Suitcases bursting with cash sat in corners like grotesque monuments to greed. But the most shocking revelation came not from the raid itself, but from the story that followed, the bravery of Madame Cafando, Robert's own wife. For 3 months, she had lived with a wire beneath her clothes, capturing every whispered conversation, every illicit deal, every confession her husband made when he thought no one could hear. Her recordings were played on national television that morning. Citizens leaned out of windows, gathered around radios, and huddled near TV screens in cafes. They heard Robert Cafando laugh as he described hiding millions in offshore accounts. They heard him boast about silencing rivals with bribes. And they heard him curse the very people whose taxes he had stolen. The betrayal was total. And yet, there was also a sense of strange redemption, for without his wife's courage, the truth might never have come out. At a hastily convened press conference, President Traoré stood before microphones, flanked by soldiers and anti-corruption officials. His voice was steady, but the weight of history pressed down on every word. "Last night," he declared, "we uncovered evidence of the largest corruption scandal in Burkina Faso's history. We found over $15 million in cash in the home of the finance minister, Robert Cafando. This money was stolen from the people, from hospitals, from schools, from farmers. But today, the truth belongs to you, the citizens." The hall erupted in applause, cheers, and even tears. For decades, leaders had promised accountability, but rarely delivered. Now, in one shocking act, Traoré had not only exposed corruption, he had crushed it at its source. International observers were stunned. Analysts in Paris and Washington whispered that Traoré's boldness would destabilize the region, or worse, make him a target. Some feared that exposing such high-level corruption would shake investor confidence. But for ordinary Burkinabe, it was the opposite. For the first time, they felt their sacrifices, their patience, their long wait for justice, were being honored. In the markets of Ouagadougou, merchants hung photos of Traoré above their stalls. In villages, griots began composing songs about the midnight raid. Children practiced kicking down imaginary doors, pretending to be the president. A wave of pride swept across the nation. Chapter 10. The Wife Who Changed History. Madame Cafando became an unlikely hero. At first, she had been terrified. The thought of betraying her own husband, the father of her children, haunted her. But she had watched too long as Robert grew fat on stolen wealth while ordinary families starved. One night, unable to bear it any longer, she approached a trusted intermediary who connected her to Traoré's inner circle. She offered to wear a wire, knowing the risk, if discovered, she could have been killed. For 3 long months, she endured the suffocating tension of living a double life. At night, she lay beside Robert as he bragged about kickbacks and smuggling operations, her heart pounding as the tiny microphone recorded every word. She smiled when he boasted, nodded when he raged. But inside she counted the days until it would all be over. When the recordings were finally played in court, she did not weep. She sat tall, her face calm, as if the weight of a secret had finally lifted. Some called her a traitor to her husband, but millions more called her a patriot, a woman who chose justice over fear. Chapter 11. The Trial. The trial of Robert Cafando was the most watched event in Burkina Faso's history. The courtroom was packed with journalists, diplomats, and citizens lucky enough to secure a seat. The judge read out the charges: embezzlement, bribery, abuse of office, and treason against the people. Cafando tried to defend himself. He claimed the money was savings and gifts from friends. He accused his wife of betrayal. He even suggested that Traoré had planted the evidence. But the tapes, the photographs, and the eyewitness testimonies buried him. When the guilty verdict was read, the crowd outside the courthouse roared like a tidal wave. Some danced in the streets, others fell to their knees in prayer. For once, justice had not been for sale. Chapter 12. A New Beginning. With the scandal exposed, President Traoré launched sweeping reforms. New anti-corruption agencies were established. Judges were rotated to prevent bribery. Every minister was forced to declare their assets publicly. But more than laws, it was the symbolism of the midnight raid that transformed Burkina Faso. Ordinary citizens began to believe again. They reported bribery attempts. They demanded transparency in their villages. They stopped accepting that this is just how Africa works. The message was clear. Corruption would no longer be hidden. In bedrooms at 2:47 a.m., it would be dragged into the light. And the world, whether friend or foe, would have to respect that a small West African nation had taken one of the boldest stands against corruption in modern history. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood tall before his people, the setting sun painting the skies of Ouagadougou in shades of red and gold. Months had passed since he had ordered the destruction of the GMO mosquito labs. The foreign media had called him reckless, radical, even dangerous. But the people of Africa knew the truth. He had saved them from a silent genocide. In the villages once plagued by strange illnesses, children now ran barefoot through the fields, laughing. The farmers, who had feared their lands would be poisoned forever, now saw their crops thriving again. Rivers flowed clean, and the animals returned to the forests. The world had watched in shock as Traoré burned down billions of dollars worth of scientific projects. Bill Gates and his global health organizations demanded sanctions. Western governments threatened him with isolation. But instead of breaking, Africa united. From Mali to Niger, from Guinea to the Congo, leaders began to follow Traoré's path. One by one, African nations banned foreign genetic experiments on their soil. Standing before thousands in the Freedom Square, Traoré raised his hand. The crowd fell silent. They wanted to turn Africa into a laboratory. They wanted to treat our children as experiments, our villages as cages, our future as a product. But Africa is not for sale. Africa is not a test tube. Africa is free. The square erupted in thunderous cheers. Flags waved, drums beat, and voices rose in unison. Vive l'Afrique! Traoré! Traoré! And in that moment, it was clear, the story was no longer about one man versus a billionaire. It was about a continent reclaiming its dignity. As night fell, Traoré looked at the stars above. He whispered to himself, "They tried to bury us, but they forgot we are seeds." And with that, Africa's new dawn began. The trial of Robert Kafando. And his corrupt network became the most watched event in Burkina Faso's modern history. For weeks, citizens crowded around radios, televisions, and mobile phones, listening to every testimony, every piece of evidence, every shocking revelation. The image of Robert's wife, Mariam, wearing the small wire that captured 3 months of damning conversations, became a symbol of bravery and patriotism. When the judges finally handed down the verdict, life imprisonment for Robert Kafando and his associates, along with the confiscation of every stolen asset, the nation erupted in cheers. The $15 million found in his bedroom was returned directly to the people. Schools were renovated, hospitals equipped, and water systems rebuilt. For the first time in decades, citizens could see their stolen wealth being used for their benefit. President Ibrahim Traoré addressed the nation from the capital, his voice steady but full of fire. "This victory is not mine alone. It belongs to the people of Burkina Faso. Corruption has no place in our land. From this day forward, justice will not sleep." The speech was broadcast across Africa and beyond, positioning Burkina Faso as a beacon of resistance against corruption and foreign exploitation. Young Africans began to look toward Ouagadougou with pride, inspired by the boldness of a leader who dared to raid the bedroom of his own finance minister at 2:47 a.m. in search of truth. Meanwhile, Mariam Kafando chose a quiet life. She refused protection, saying simply, "I wore the wire not as Robert's wife, but as a daughter of Burkina Faso. My loyalty is to my country." Her courage transformed her into a folk hero, and songs were written about her bravery. She became the embodiment of a simple but powerful truth. One honest voice can shatter the walls of corruption. Years later, historians would write about that night, the creak of the minister's bedroom, door crashing down, the stacks of cash spilling across the floor, the stunned silence of betrayal exposed. They would call it the Midnight Purge, the moment when Burkina Faso took its destiny back into its own hands. And as the sun rose over Ouagadougou, children walked to schools that had once been broken but were now rebuilt, holding hands, laughing, dreaming. The future had changed. The people had won. Burkina Faso was reborn.